Hello.
Hello. Erin?
Adam's got his costume on.
Hey, Megan.
I think that's the tiniest witch hat I've ever seen.
I'm going as a giant witch with a regular size hat.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun, I hope.
Yeah, it should be. Well, we'll get started here because I know we've got some people who are interested to hear what you guys have to say about politics. So welcome to Pints Politics. I'm Erin Jordan. I'm the Gazette's investigative reporter, and I'm also the moderator for tonight. So it's been more than a month since we were together, and quite a bit's happened. We're just 5 days from the 2020 general election. We've got a new Supreme Court justice, a new wave of COVID-19, and new polls to talk about. And I'm really looking forward to getting your insights tonight. Before we start, I want to introduce our panelists. We have our Gazette crew, which includes Todd Dorman, Gazette Insights and Opinion Editor, James Lynch, Gazette Political Reporter, and Adam Sullivan, Gazette Columnist. And joining us tonight, we have the pleasure of talking to Megan Goldberg. She's an assistant professor of American politics at Cornell College in Mount Vernon. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. Well, and just to remind people who are watching Pints and Politics tonight, you can submit questions through Zoom. It's the gray box left of the video with a live label on it. You have to put an email address in, but no sign up is required. And so the question submission is only available through the link at thegazette.com, not if you're watching on YouTube. So go to the website there, and I'll try to work in as many of those questions as I can during our hour here tonight. So let's get going. Just to start off, the U.S. Senate on Monday confirmed Amy Coney Barrett to the U.S. Supreme Court by a vote of 52 to 48, with Republican Senator Susan Collins being the only GOP senator to vote with Democrats. So there were no Democrats who voted for confirmation, which is a first for the Supreme Court. I wanted to ask the panel, which groups in America are likely to be helped or hurt by this appointment?
I think the obvious answer is that there will be attempts to overturn reproductive rights statutes. And I think it's whatever justice Trump nominated was going to be a conservative. And so I think that was going to be suspected all along that they would take a try at Roe v. Wade. But I think Amy Coney Barrett seems like a particularly interested in that and taking something like that on, at least as the conventional wisdom. But I think that there are, with the number of conservatives on the court now, I think there's a wide number of issues that they could take on and have a really drastic effect.
It could be the president himself, the Trump campaign, that gets the quickest benefit if the election is contested in some way, like we saw in 2000, and it ends up going to the Supreme Court. There's a lot of speculation that Amy Coney Barrett would be someone who would be willing to join with conservatives and potentially make a ruling that would help the Trump campaign if there were disputed ballots in swing states. And I think Democrats were sort of taken aback this week by Brett Kavanaugh's the statement that he made which I'm forgetting which case it was. Was it Pennsylvania or Wisconsin? I think Wisconsin, and signaling that he might be willing to, rule against continuing to count ballots after the election is over. So there's a lot of worry about that, and her confirmation just kind of stokes those worries that the Supreme Court will side with the Trump campaign.
Yeah, I think, Todd, picking up on that, Brett Kavanaugh is really the person to watch right now, because Amy Coney Barrett's addition to the court has made him the new sort of like median member. So whatever he decides is going to be really critical. Mm-hmm. And so if we see him signaling, these, he was referencing the concurrent opinion in Bush v. Gore. And so that, I think, is what people sort of have their eye on in terms of like how, if election related cases make their way to the court, that his opinions are really going to matter a lot.
I don't want to read too much into it, but Coney Barrett did not participate in a couple of the election-related cases that the court heard this week. That doesn't necessarily mean she'll recuse herself if there's a Trump v. Biden case next week.
So we've got some political visits this week, which is totally what you'd expect. Vice President Mike Pence was in Des Moines today, and former Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden will be in the state tomorrow, as far as I understand. So Biden has a 1.4 percentage point lead in the average of polls on Real Clear Politics. What kind of impact do these like last minute visits have on the election?
That's a good question. And I've often wondered that because, I mean, if you look at voting statewide, there's about 40, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the electorate has voted. I was talking to Johnson County Auditor Travis Whipper today. He said he expects by the end of the day, it'll be 50 to 60% in Johnson County.
We're losing you a little bit, Jim.
70 to 80%. I'm sorry?
Oh, no, you're just a little bit delayed. I think you're okay.
Okay. You know, the people who are there have already made up their minds. Many of them have voted. So it's not about convincing those people. It's more about trying to get them to convince their neighbors or friends who haven't voted to go out and get to the polls. And I mean, we're talking about a shrinking number of people.
I think James is trying to say that, I mean, there's we're late in the game now. I mean, perhaps half of the people who are going to vote have already voted.
Voters who haven't made up their mind and yet are going to vote. Right. So the return on investment seems pretty small.
I think that's right. I mean, I think in general, I think events probably have not a huge impact on the election, but this is a weird election. There's not as much ground game. There's not as much person-to-person voter contact as we traditionally see. My understanding is the Republicans are doing some of it, and the Democrats are really hardly doing any at all. And so maybe factors are different, but it also seems like an election where people have their minds made up by this point too. It
can have a big impact if you go to a rally and get hypothermia, like some people did in Omaha this week when they couldn't get back to their buses, or couldn't get buses back to their cars, I guess. So that was a big impact. I keep getting a text message that says I'm supposed to encourage 3 friends to vote, and these people obviously don't know I'm an opinion columnist, and I don't have 3 friends.
And all you do is try to influence people.
Yeah, look where that got me.
Yeah.
Did anyone wonder how that crowd got out to the 3 to 4 mile place? I mean, were there buses that took them out there initially and then the buses just didn't come back? Or
that's my understanding. And I don't know if it's been reported if they didn't arrange that, or if something fell through, or if the payment didn't come or what.
I thought part of it was like a timing issue too, that like getting there, you know, some people get there early. And so it's sort of naturally, right, the number of buses they had. And so, but then everyone wants to leave at the same time. You know, it's sort of how like often getting into a stadium for a sports game is not as bad as trying to get out. They had not increased the number of buses for everyone leaving at once or something.
It seems understandable, but at the same time, it's like that is also a foreseeable logistical issue, right? Like the amount of, it reflects extremely poorly on the campaign to have something like that happen.
Well, and Joni Ernst showed up at that rally, and the Trump campaign didn't give her a speaking slot, which was sort of surprising. I mean, I think that's why she was there, was to sort of, you know, speak to the voters in Southwest Iowa. And or maybe the way it turned out, it was good that she didn't get a high profile role in that particular debacle.
I guess kind of to that point, James, you've been out there to some of these events. I know there haven't been a lot. What has COVID done with, what's the campaign season been like?
Very strange, very strange. There, like you said, there aren't a lot of events. Many of them are outside, which if it's above freezing isn't so bad. But indoors, it's not a good scene. We've all seen pictures of Trump rallies where people are shoulder to shoulder. Not many of them are wearing masks. Donald Trump Jr. was in Cedar Rapids the other night, and that was the case. Early in the day, Liz Martin, our photographer, was over there and took a picture. They had chairs set up in pairs, and they were spread out at least 6 feet apart. Well, when I got there about an hour before the event started, those chairs were still there, but people were standing all around them. So, if people were shoulder to shoulder, I estimated maybe a third of the people were wearing masks. Nobody seemed to be too concerned about that. And I guess, Todd's concerned about hypothermia. The maybe bigger concern is going to one of these rallies and coming away with COVID.
Maybe both.
That's true too, because I don't think freezing temperature kills the germ.
Apparently not.
So this another news item this week, President Donald Trump won the youth straw poll in Iowa with 57% of the vote. So this involves students in 250 schools, including some schools in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. Adam, how closely would you guess this tracks with how these students' parents are voting or will vote?
Probably pretty closely. And so you wouldn't expect that the students participating are a representative sample of students or of people who are going to participate in the election. So I wouldn't read too much into it. Last cycle and the cycle before that, in fact, I know it trended towards Republicans above and beyond what the actual results were. So I'm guessing a lot of students are voting how their parents are, but I know young people, I know you do too, and I know they have their own ideas too. There's also the possibility that they don't take it very seriously, which I don't blame a young person if they don't take our political system very seriously. And so you saw Kanye West got probably more votes than he'll get in the actual election. So I wouldn't read too much into it, but I'm glad to do it. I think it's good to get students thinking about that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seemed like there were a lot fewer kids participating this year. I think there were more than 50,000 last time around in 2016. I think this was more 27, 30,000. And it wasn't clear exactly how the impact was, considering, hybrid learning approaches and some kids, going to school at home. And so it seemed like with all the different circumstances this time, it may have even been a little less of a indicator, but it's a cool thing for kids to do, and I think we should look at it in that light instead of and anymore we're all just sort of fixated on finding any tea leaves that will tell us what's going to happen. We can't wait. We have to know.
I would just say real quick that I think Secretary of State Paul Pate deserves some credit for, we've criticized him a lot on the editorial board for, he's supported voter ID. He's done things with voting that we really, really detest. But he is pretty serious about youth engagement and about getting young people registered. And I think he deserves a little bit of credit for that.
Yeah.
So Megan, I was interested to read that you study, among other things, how governors and state parties shift their rhetoric close to elections and how the public reacts to these shifts. So what shifts have you seen in Iowa leading up to this election?
Yeah, so this has been interesting because we aren't facing a gubernatorial election, right? And so I think what we've actually seen instead is, it's possible. So that's, you see the biggest shifts in states where you have a governor who's like not in the sort of the majority party. So a lot of my work is inspired by like the Charlie Bakers and the John Bel Edwards of the country. But I think it's really interesting that we've seen Kim Reynolds take on, like in some ways, even the persona, but a lot of the rhetoric of Trump, and is doing that sort of in a team effort with Joni Ernst. And that's not surprising because she doesn't face re-election right now. So she can be a tool of the party to sort of consolidate messaging, stay on brand, and really like be an asset to Joni Ernst in terms of being another sort of surrogate. So it's not surprising to me that she has really aligned herself with the National Republican Party right now.
That's given rise to some speculation that she's auditioning for a job in the next Trump administration, that she's got her eye on something, which, that and $2 will get you a cup of coffee downtown. But yeah, there are people talking about that. And of course, every election, we start talking about the next election. So it's not surprising.
Yeah, and even, she might be gearing up for a national run herself or a Senate campaign, right? We increasingly see governors running for president. And I can see, if you're an Iowan governor, to be like, oh, maybe I have an advantage because Iowa starts. And so I'm already well known. So I agree. There's some ambition there that might be driving it too.
With it seems like there's been some people in the newsroom noting that there hasn't been a coronavirus press conference recently. I wonder if that's like a effort to just wait until after the election, or what do you guys read into that?
It's been kind of hit and miss, since I don't know when she quit the daily news conferences, and it's been kind of hit and miss since then. She's out on the campaign trail a lot. She said, I think it was earlier today, she said that, hey, I'm accessible because I'm talking to people, I'm talking to reporters around the state. But there's no good news to talk about. So it seems like she would be reluctant to have news conferences when she knows she's going to get hammered for the rising positivity rate, the rising number of people in hospitals. Who wants to talk about that stuff?
Well, yeah, and she doesn't have like a plan to talk about. It's like, okay, these bad things are happening. Here's what we're going to do. All she can say is that, well, we're just going to kind of keep what we're doing, and we're going to target this and target that. And here, Dr. Padati, you answer these questions because I don't want to. And I mean, as James says, it's all bad news. Hospitalizations are up. The White House task force is continually telling us we need to do more, and that more than half the counties in the state are in the red zone, and all of these things. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's not surprising that she's not having a press conference, but at the same time, Iowans have a ton of questions right now about what's happening, what's going to happen. Winter is ahead. Experts say that the pandemic will worsen in cold weather months when we can't be outside and are sort of stuck together indoors. So she should be having press conferences. She's not having them. And then on top of that, today, I think she sort of poked at Teresa Greenfield for curtailing her RV tour because one of her staffers that tested positive for the coronavirus. And, she sort of poked fun of her, and like, this is the governor that says that, I trust Iowans to do the right thing. Teresa Greenfield curtails her campaign and gets an earful from the same governor. So interesting and sort of maddening.
If I could just dwell on a minute on something, James said that, she, as one of her defenses, she says, well, she's available to press at these events and stuff. We all know that the vibe at a small press gaggle is much different than a press conference. And also the whole press conference is on the record and on YouTube for everyone to watch. And so I know, in particular, a lot of educators have been watching those press conferences regularly because they want updates on, COVID in the schools. Well, at a press, at a small press availability at an event, you're going to get a couple quotes in the newspapers, but you're not going to have the whole thing. And so the governor's office has repeatedly fallen back on that, they're available to reporters, but it's really important that you do a full press conference. I think once a week is not too much to ask. That's on the record and on video for every Iowan to watch.
Well, and I remember trying to chase down Governor Reynolds at an event this summer, and literally I had to chase her and shout my question as she was walking away, so it's not even easy. I don't know if there are gaggles after every event or not, but it's not always easy to get in those questions.
I this is probably like the last time I was at a Reynolds event. It was more than a year ago, but they or it was during the last election, and I asked her press secretary, who's still her press secretary, if I could have availability afterwards, and he said yes. But then they drove her away in a gator, like she got on a golf cart and drove away from me. And I'm not that fast. Maybe you could have caught her, Erin.
That's kind of what like this was like. So yeah, whisked away.
Well, yeah, and beyond those moments when you can actually get access or try to get access, I mean, this administration has basically stonewalled journalists at every turn. They're emailed questions, requests for explanations, requests for data. I mean, we found out about a deposition this week where the state basically admitted that the governor's spokesman had asked the Department of Public Health to hold, a public records request, which is basically unlawful under the public records law. So yeah, this is not they often will say that they're the most transparent administration, which is sort of like saying East Germany was the Democratic Republic. I mean, it's just sort of, they're not press friendly, they're not transparent, and they often have tried to, hold off questions that need to be answered.
Well, and there's sort of a high bar, and maybe that's not the right term, but to use. But I mean, in the past, we've had governors who made themselves available on a regular basis. Terry Branstad, did his weekly news conference. If you ran into him on the sidewalk, he'd give you an impromptu news conference. If he was willing to talk pretty much any time. Chet Culver, continued that. Tom Vilsack continued that. Culver cut it off when he got into trouble a few times, but Reynolds started out doing weekly news conferences, and that has really sort of cut that off. And so I think there was an expectation, especially among the News Corps, for weekly news conferences. And it's one of those things, when you stop doing it, people notice and they ask why, and then they're critical that you're not doing it. And it strikes me as it's a no-win situation for the governor to try to avoid the media, because you either try to answer hard questions or you take brickbats for not answering at all.
Well, and there used to be some space between campaigning and governing. When the campaign was over and the governing started, it was, reporters could ask questions about policy and get answers, and there were press conferences. But now it's just 100%, full campaign mode all the time. And when you're in full campaign mode, the press, is an adversary, and they're treated as such. And it's too bad that it's become that way. And so more and more we see that sort of a adversarial relationship, and particularly among Republican office holders who have made a living, bashing us one way or the other, enemy of the people and all that kind of stuff. It's a tactic that they've gone back to again and again.
Megan, have you seen that same phenomenon in other states as well? Just kind of the adversarial relationship, and less governing, more campaigning?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a couple things. One is that like the baseline strategy for anyone in office, for anyone who's going to run again as an incumbent, is to avoid blame and take credit. And so when things are bad, right, like driving away in a gator is literally trying to avoid blame. And so that's, why would you hold a press conference when all it's going to do is end up blaming you, especially if you don't have, like, one way to avoid blame is like you have a scapegoat. And so I think we saw Reynolds like being a little bit more public with COVID-19, when universities started back in session, because our numbers went up, but you could attribute it to irresponsible university students, right? And so there's a scapegoat there. Right now, it's not clear what that would be. But then I think that I think that an adversarial relationship with the media is, again, part of the Trump playbook that Reynolds is adopting. But I also think, right, that's another sort of way that you can avoid blame. If you can cast doubt on reporters and journalism in general, then when they blame you for things like maybe they're not trustworthy, and that is problematic for a lot of reasons in a democracy. But I think it's still just a new development in a really old strategy of trying to avoid blame for a bad economy, a pandemic, or whatever is happening.
Yeah,
You
that makes
definitely see
sense.
occasionally at the press conferences, and I don't think Reynolds dives nearly deep as Trump does into anti-press rhetoric, but she does occasionally at the press conference. She'll say, kind of you plural at the media. You all keep asking me these kinds of questions or something, which, and I think she's acknowledged that she's kind of lost her cool in those press conferences a couple of times, but it's definitely not a good look.
So moving to a point that James made earlier, the Iowa Secretary of State's office today reported, I think 88% of requested absentee ballots have been received by county auditors. And the number of absentee votes cast, about 851,000, is over the record set in 2012. Just wanted to open that up to the panel. What do you think about this development in this year, and how, if it any, will this change what election day is like?
Well, it'll change it in that there won't be as many people voting. Although the Quinnipiac poll that came out today, I think something like 40% of people said they were going to vote on election day, but I'm not sure there's going to be 40% left by election day. There's going to be a smaller number of people voting on election day, which is a big change. I think it's going to be interesting how this affects future elections. I mean, in 4 years, are we still going to be voting by mail? People are going to say like, hey, that was pretty easy. That worked out well, and not go out on election day. I mean, I've voted by either mail or early in person for several election cycles now. And I don't really see any point in going and standing in line to vote when I can just drop it in the ballot box, in the lobby of my building. So I think that's going to be the big impact, is how it affects future elections.
I believe that there are somewhat fewer polling places across the state this year than there were in previous years. I think it's important to say that I think those closures are either COVID precautions or that they are regularly planned. This is not the type of thing that we see in some other states where they close down precincts in some areas to suppress the vote. To my understanding, that's not what's happening in Iowa. But it is especially important that you go and check. Your polling place might not be the same. It might be consolidated with some other precinct this year. And so folks should go and check. But I am one of those bad late voters. I'm planning to vote on election day. I live right across from my polling place, so I guess I'll go in the morning, and if it's busy, I guess I'll just try back a few more times. But so I will be the one vote on election day if there's only one in my precinct. That'll be me.
Well, if you work from home, you can easily just look out the window and see, is there a line? Should I go over?
Yeah, I can literally see my polling place from my house, so it's great.
Yeah, this is the first time I voted early, so I guess I'm a dinosaur. But I know in Lynn County that there's 37% fewer precincts, and I think that was driven mainly by the fact that, well, we all know when we go to the precinct on election day that there are older folks that are, usually working as those election staff, and a lot of them are worried about the pandemic with good reason. And I think, I know Lynn County had trouble rounding up enough poll workers, and that's one of the reasons they had to curtail the number of precincts. But I think Joel Miller's getting some email today because that fact was featured in an NPR story, and I think folks nationally saw this reduction in polling places as not just a function of practicality, but something more nefarious. And there were a few of them that I was included on. And I'm like, well, I think Joel's used to catching hell this election cycle, so I suppose I think he can handle it.
Two things I would say. One is that talking to auditors, they feel pretty good about their plans that they have in place and how things are working. Their big fear right now seems to be COVID, that if poll workers start calling in like over the weekend and saying like, I tested positive, I can't be there. It doesn't take that many poll workers to really make a mess of things on Tuesday. If you lose a dozen, 24 poll workers in a county like Lynn or Johnson or any of these counties around us, it makes a big difference. And that's their big worry now. And I forgot my second point, so never mind.
Yeah, I think they're also worried about having enough time to process and count all the absentee ballots. I know there were some auditors who were asking the legislative council to give them, more time. The legislative council did give them a couple more days to sort of open the envelopes and do all of that, but they still can't start counting until Monday, which is better than the situation in a lot of states.
In some counties, they started last weekend opening, sort of sorting things through and getting them lined up, and they'll do more of that again this weekend so that when they can actually start counting, they're ready to count.
Yeah.
The scary thing that people have been talking about is these votes that come in after Election Day, but were mailed before Election Day. They're still valid, although some people are trying to make an argument they're not valid, including a Supreme Court justice. So my observation is people voted very early. We'll still have some of that, certainly, that come in after Election Day. And the really tricky situation is when that's enough to swing an election.
Yeah.
If those, if it's within 100 votes and we still have 1,000 votes out, that's when it gets really tricky. So those are going to be the things to watch for. It would surprise me if any of our federal races came down to that, but it's easy to see how a number of state legislative races could come down to, 100 votes with 1,000 votes still in the field.
But
go ahead.
People are somewhat used to maybe not having answers for those smaller races right away. I think that people should, in general, also not always expect results on election night, even for federal races. And we have all seen the fallout of that expectation that we know right away who wins. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. I think that, that voting by mail at this rate is new to Iowa. And so we have to count a lot more than we've had to do. And so there's the potential for technical glitches when it's all the machinery counting them. And so, we have experience when it's like a ballot counter at a polling place not working, but maybe less experience, dealing with these voting machines. But I think it's, things break occasionally. And I'm hoping that doesn't spin out into somehow this is illegitimate. Because if things are, I feel like a lot of us maybe said this in February, that the reason things are taking longer now is we want to make sure it's right. And so if things are taking a longer time, it's because we're being careful, not because, anyone's trying to steal something.
And I would say the Iowa Democrats got a really bad deal for the caucuses. This expectation that we have, they messed up for sure, but the expectation that we have these results, that's a media creation basically, and not by us, but by the, the cable media, basically the TV news. And that's not reasonable in this day and age. We don't need results on election night, and that needs to be the new expectation, and including caucuses. So if there's ever an Iowa caucus, don't expect to have that on election night.
Caucus night will become the new norm.
Yeah.
So moving to the U.S. Senate race, Democrat Teresa Greenfield has a slight lead over incumbent Republican Joni Ernst, but the race still is ranked as a toss-up. So this has been a pretty vicious election with lots of national ads. I just heard one the other day where it was like, Joni Ernst said she would continue to live in the same house, but then bought a $400,000 condo. And I was like, wow, this has really gotten to a new low. But
for the record, she moved out because she was the victim of domestic abuse, right? That's why she moved homes.
Yeah, I don't think
bought a house in DC when she said she would,
okay.
but not to I don't want to come across as defending a particular candidate because I'll get in trouble with Cornell. But just having lived in DC, $400,000 does not buy you a very nice house.
Yeah,
that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I was thinking about a condo and where she would probably have a condo, which was probably DC, and I was like, that's probably not even that much. But anyway, that was just a sign to me. I wanted to ask you guys, what would you say has been the most challenging attack for each of these candidates to overcome?
So unfortunately, I think for Greenfield, the hardest attack to overcome has been that she's like a radical leftist or that she's Antifa or whatever. It's difficult to overcome, and it's totally not true. I wrote last week, she's really not even progressive. She's middle of the road on every issue. She's probably more conservative than some Republicans were 10 years ago, like when there was actually moderate Republicans. Like she's really not a progressive at all. But every Democrat by the Republicans is painted as a radical leftist. And so I think that's been, she's really spent a lot of time trying to combat that. She spent a lot of time trying to say, no, I like the police. I don't want the Green New Deal. I don't want to pack the court. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy that like how conservative Iowa's Democrats are versus the Republicans still use that line of attack against them, that they're radical leftists.
I think Democrats might believe that the toughest thing for Joni Ernst is that she tied herself so close to Donald Trump, which may, obviously is a problem with him being not so popular. But she's had to spend a lot of time sort of convincing people that she's not against getting rid of healthcare coverage for pre-existing conditions. I think that's an issue that hits home with a lot of folks. And she did vote multiple times to, repeal the ACA. And so it's very tough for her to argue that away. And also it's tough because the Republicans don't have a healthcare plan of their own that she can point to. So that healthcare issue has dogged her. And I think that's one of the reasons why some voters that may have voted for her last time abandoned her this time.
The most surprising thing to me about this race is how both candidates have been defined by the opposition. And it's especially surprising for an incumbent, Joni Ernst, who's been there 6 years, has a record, and how much she has been defined as this person who's going to rip away your health care, doesn't care about people with pre-existing conditions and so on. And I think to a lesser degree, but still, Teresa Greenfield has been defined by Republicans as this socialist, as Adam was saying, this far left, radical, funded by the mob. She stands with the mob sort of thing. And it's really surprising that they didn't define themselves sooner in more positive ways. And I wonder if that's not just a function of the money in these races. This is the second most expensive Senate campaign in the country this cycle. And it's incredible the amount of money that's being spent. And when you have that much money, I guess you can pretty much do anything you want, including define your opponent. And it seems that's what they've done.
See, I think I had a not totally opposite reaction, but I think one challenge for Ernst is that she has a record. And so that gives Greenfield and her campaign a lot of material to work with. Where I think we see on the Ernst side, they try to define her by all of these other people who are already in office, right? She talks a lot about Nancy Pelosi and these radical leftists and things they have done. And Greenfield she's never held office with them. So it's like, it's not as effective as saying like you, Joni Ernst, like voted this particular way. You've already done that. And it's sort of a weird dynamic that we don't see that often because incumbents win at an incredibly high rate. And as a result, we don't get super high quality challengers to incumbents all the time. And we don't actually see like races quite this tight with incumbents especially in a place like Iowa, where no one really thought that this was going to be, a toss up. So I think it's sort of an interesting dynamic that, and that's maybe part of why these like national PACs have been so influential, is because I don't know that either campaign was necessarily prepared for the race to be the way it is.
Greenfield is, in my estimation, is not even that high a quality a candidate. Her personal story is good. She's fine on the stump, but she doesn't have, in the primary that she came out of, there was a lot more public policy experience and probably even better campaigners on that ticket. And so she's good as far as having access to outside money and being able to build those relationships. But, if I would have guessed who would be ahead at this point, I would have guessed that Trump would have been several points ahead of Trump. That Ernst would have been ahead of Trump and that she would be reelected. But so that reflects very poorly on the strategy of cozying up to Trump if Joni Ernst loses this election.
Adam, that's something that's kind of fascinated me, is that Republicans don't seem to have really gone after Teresa Greenfield as this sort of making this comparison like, oh, you want to elect somebody with no experience in elected office? How's that working out with our president? Somebody who has a spotty business record, it's the comparison to Donald Trump is so obvious. I'm surprised that people haven't made that comparison, even though it doesn't reflect well on the president. In a lot of cases, you don't worry about anybody else on the ballot, you just worry about yourself. And I haven't heard Republicans really make that argument at all, that you're running somebody who has virtually no experience and not a great track record.
Well, they've spent a lot
James,
of oh, go ahead.
They would have to acknowledge that the president has some faults, and I've been spending 4 years trying to get Republicans to acknowledge that, and they won't publicly.
Well,
but they know it.
The Republicans spent a lot of time trying to, make hay of Teresa Greenfield's, campaign fundraising, that she said she wouldn't take corporate PACs, and then, that she took money from entities that did take corporate PACs. And I tell you, if you're centering your message on campaign finance, I mean, voters just basically look at the whole system and think, yeah, everybody's a hypocrite. Everybody's awash in dirty money. And it's just kind of something that doesn't sway people. I mean, take it from me, I write about it. And if I want to see my page views plunge, I write about campaign finance because nobody wants to read about it.
What about your column today, Todd, that had like alcoholic drinks that were themed toward the election? You think you'll get a lot of clicks on that?
Well,
that one will crescendo until election night. That one will keep building traffic, I think.
I'm hoping that I just get complimentary bottles. That's all I hope for.
You have to start name dropping specific brands, and then you'll get a.
I know, that's my problem. I tried to be clever, and
So, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying there's no product placement in the column.
Okay. So access to healthcare has been one of the big topics in the first district race between Republican Ashley Hinson and her Democratic opponent, Abby Finkenauer, the incumbent. James, you wrote about this week. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's about?
Well, it's sort of the same in every race, isn't that everybody's for healthcare, but Democrats have a plan. The Affordable Care Act. Republicans don't have a plan. So you're not comparing Ford to Chevy, you're comparing Ford to a car that we're going to build later, maybe. And it really puts Republican candidates at a disadvantage, because even though the Affordable Care Act isn't overwhelmingly popular, it has enough support that without an alternative, people are going to like it, are going to stick with it. And so you can talk about what you want to do for healthcare, and Democrats say like, yeah, but we already got a plan. We're doing it. The most critical Democrats can get is saying like, well, we need to fix it. We need to improve it. We need to build on it. And Republicans just, try to say, well, no, we don't want to rip out your healthcare, but we don't have a plan for it.
And is there a quote? Oh, I was just going to say, isn't there a quote too that Ashley Hinson was trying to kind of back away from, or
I mean, her comment, which was part of a longer comment, was that not every American wants health care. She was talking about the difference between health care and health insurance, and trying to make the point that there are some people out there who just prefer to pay cash, or they want limited policies that don't cover everything. There's some demand for high deductible policies, for people who can afford to do those things. So it's not a one size fits all healthcare or health insurance market. And Democrats seized on that one snippet to make a very effective ad.
I agree with Henson on the substance of those comments, actually, but the Trump administration, or the Congress, passed and Trump signed to remove the individual mandate for health insurance. They've also moved to deregulate skinnier healthcare plans, and Iowa has pursued legislation so people can have those stripped down healthcare plans. I think we ought to have more of that. I think people ought to be able to buy many different kinds of insurance if they want to. But to a large extent, that issue has been dealt with. So I agree that was taken out of context, like James said, but the policy making is already there. And that's one of the things I would give credit to the Trump administration for.
I wanted to mention here that if people are submitting questions, for some reason they're not flowing through to our our setup here. We're working on that, and hopefully we'll get some of them in here before we finish up the hour, but I just wanted to let people know that. So thinking ahead to Tuesday night, you guys had mentioned that, perhaps we shouldn't all have an expectation that it's all gonna be sewn up by 10 p.m. and that kind of thing. If we don't have preliminary election results on Tuesday night, what types of messages do you expect to appear the next day? And if it's too close, I think there are some people legitimately worried out there about, I don't know, maybe violence is too strong of a word, but I think there are some people worried about things devolving. What do you guys think?
I think I'm probably more worried about things devolving into chaos or violence if we do have a winner. And it seems like it might be questionable. I don't know. I'm trying to remember like 2000, the day after. I do remember that our local paper had the wrong headline. That my parents have a Gore 1 paper still. I think it's going to be weird if it's sort of just like we don't know.
I think it was so unexpected in 2000 that we wouldn't know the winner, that people were just sort of like holding their breath. I don't think that's going to be the case this time. I think that people will be demanding answers, and there will be a lot of people who will be assigning blame and reasons for why we don't have answers. And you're already starting to see that in some of these news releases we get from various groups, that if we don't have an answer by midnight Tuesday, it's because somebody is not counting ballots or they're suppressing ballots somewhere, which is really troublesome when you think about this going forward, because we probably won't know the results Tuesday night.
Well, a lot of it depends on whether one side or the other at the end of the night feels as though they've been robbed in some way. Someone's declared victory that they don't feel is the legitimate victor. I think Walmart announced today that they're taking guns and ammunition off the shelves because they're afraid of civil unrest and the potential of people looting the store and stealing things. And so that, that gives you pause. The nation's largest retailer is obviously concerned. And you see stuff on social media that gives you pause, people talking about, civil wars and arming themselves and all of that. But I think if we simply don't have a result and that the votes are still being counted and that some states are still in doubt, I think people will sort of keep their powder dry, hopefully not literally, but if there is some reason for one side or the other to feel like they've been, given the shaft, then we might see things devolve in a hurry.
I think a couple to look for is you'll see both sides post, videos and photos from election day of that there's voter suppression or something sketchy going on here and there, and those are going to be hard to verify as they come out. But after the results come in, the thing I'm going to look towards is President Trump can't help himself from being on Twitter and saying just totally stupid stuff. I presume he'll declare himself a winner or declare that there's been some massive voter fraud. But that's almost a given. But the interesting thing to me is going to be how Republicans respond to that. And so you have Republicans in places of power who aren't actually stupid people. And so it's interesting to see, but they are in the habit of agreeing with everything the president says, or at least not disagreeing. And so do you have some of those guys come out on election night or in the next day or two and say, no, the president is wrong, he lost the election? Because it's plausible that Joe Biden wins, by 5% in enough states to get him to 270. And it's really not any, there's not any question about it. But it's extremely difficult for me to see how the president concedes the race in that situation. And I'll be interested to see how the president's defenders in the House and the Senate deal with that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens during the day on election day, whether there are irregularities and problems. What happens if sort of folks on the right, militias or whatever you want to call them, show up to polling places, and then folks on the left show up to counter those, bad things happen. That's how many flashpoints are there going to be? How many stories are there going to be that call into question the validity of voting here or there? I mean, it's so, how the election is conducted, and also, how responsible the media is in not blowing up small things into big things is going to make a difference too.
Well, there will be problems and there will be irregularities. I mean, that goes with every election. And yeah, you're right, Todd. It depends on how the media responds to that. And then, I mean, I sort of expect the worst from various partisan groups, throughout the day. And yeah, there'll be reports of irregularities because, blaming somebody. Quite frankly, we're pretty spoiled here in Iowa. I mean, our election system, we've had some hiccups, 2 years ago with mail-in ballots that weren't counted, didn't come in time. But for the most part, elections have run pretty smoothly here.
Yeah, I think also, one thing that I think worries me is some like numerical illiteracy.
So.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Megan.
Okay. Sorry. I was going to say one thing that worries me a little bit is sort of numerical illiteracy, and that's, in the way that media interprets some of these small events. So like if a polling place has violence, right, that's like one polling place out of how many in America. And that's not good that it happened in one place, but it doesn't undermine like the entire election. And so I think we see this a lot. It happens to me in the classroom. I have someone come to me and say, well, there are 10,000 instances of voter fraud in Texas. And if you look at it, it's like, yes, in the last 10 years, over every single election that happened. And there are multiple elections per year if you include like local and state races. And so, even numbers on their own that seem big are very small in the grand scheme of things and in how they would actually affect the outcome. And so that's what I hope that we see some responsibility regarding how we talk about those numbers.
So I don't know if you all know yet, with 5 days out, what your election night assignment or election day will look like with, coverage or writing or punditry or that sort of thing. What do you guys think you'll be doing on election night?
I have to go vote. Like an idiot voting on election day. Like it's like way late.
Okay, well, after you're done with that, what will you be doing work-wise?
I mean, we have to make a page for the next day, but I think we're not issuing hot takes on the election the next day because there's too many things up in the air. We have an earlier deadline than other folks, but obviously we'll be watching it along with everybody else, and we'll be back here the following Thursday, a week from tonight, for a Pints Politics.
I'm going to be, going to the grocery store to get staple items, maybe getting some plywood for the windows, that kind of thing. I think it's kind of like a hurricane this time. So I think we can all, I don't have guns and ammunition, so I don't know if it's too late. I can't go to Walmart now because obviously they put all that stuff away, but
it's for the right price. You can get anything.
That's true. Send me the name of a couple guys after the show.
We just watched the movie Signs last weekend, and plywood on the windows and doors helped against aliens. So,
yeah.
Well,
it's good for your local plywood dealer, frankly.
Yeah. So James and Megan, what are you guys going to be doing on election night?
I will be watching results come in, specifically the first district race here. In Northeast Iowa, the Finkenauer-Hinson race. But I'll probably be watching all the races.
So I will be on KCRG answering, I don't know what we're going to talk about. And then I am also, my campaigns and elections class starts on Monday, right before the election. So I will be communicating with my class in some way on Slack or something about, talking about what's happening. And also probably, I found out last week, I have a few friends who are sitting on the decision boards of national network, like on NBC and ABC. So I will be bothering them. What's going on? So yeah, so I'll be watching, I'm sort of a data person. So I'll be watching the numbers, seeing and who's there's, Twitter is not real life, but if you are on Twitter, there's a big battle right now between 538's forecasts and the Economist's forecasts. And so I want to know how that turns out. It's like the least important issue of 2020, but I need to know who wins.
Sounds like a good one. Well, I want to wrap up with kind of a fun question here. So Halloween is Saturday, and we'll probably have fewer kids out trick-or-treating. But I wanted to ask you guys, what political costume would you like to see someone attempt for Halloween? Again, I should have maybe given you a lead time on this.
I'm trying to make a joke with the witch hat, but I don't want to be sexist or make any sexist political jokes. And so I don't know, because the witch is a very gendered, like scary thing. But it's the hat I have on. So I don't know.
Maybe it's like a wizard hat.
Okay. I'll work on that. I'll work on the joke.
Maybe somebody could, pull off the Pence fly. Maybe if you could make
very good.
Yeah.
I think I saw a wig that you could get that had like a plastic fly on it.
Maybe if you could like wear like a gray toupee as like a skirt, maybe, and then you're the fly. I don't know. Maybe by next year there'll be sexy Pence fly. You can buy it at Party City. I don't know.
Maybe
Probably
by next
not.
year, Pence will be scrubbed from the national memory.
Yeah. Pence, who was that?
I think we'll see lots of couples costumes where one half of the couple is COVID and the other half is like Trump or I don't know.
Or
like a doctor, maybe like the sexy doctor, sexy nurse will be really big this year.
you could be COVID, and then you could like find 5,000 dates to be Trump rally goers getting COVID.
There you go.
Well, I think that ridiculous costume company that makes all the sexy whatnot announced that they would not go there with COVID. They have a standard apparently, and that's it. So
I think we'll see a lot of Dr. Fauci costumes.
yeah.
Well, I did finally get a comment here from one of the audience members, but it just says that the Zoom video makes me look like I'm wearing an LED hat. So,
Oh, you have a ceiling fan on your head.
yes, I have a light above me that's reflecting in the glass. So
I thought it was an aura. I wasn't in his hand.
here, I'll shift. So yeah, that was the only comment I've gotten so far, but
I'm glad the
still
important stuff got through, at least.
there's 3 minutes, but I wanted to, I guess, just wrap up here. We've got a few announcements here. As Adam mentioned, we're fortunate to have more Pints and Politics back a week from tonight. On November 5th, we'll be meeting again from 5:30 to 6:30 on Zoom. By then, election night will be in our rearview mirror, and we can talk about all the results, which hopefully we'll have. And the last Pints and Politics of the year is December 17th. So thank you so much to Megan Goldberg, a political science professor from Cornell College, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was. And thanks to our regular panelists, Adam, James, and Todd.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
That witch up there, a warlock. And we'll look forward to seeing y'all next week. So have a great night.
Thanks.